enjoyed the sunshine. There'll be more of that tomorrow, so those people who fail to make it are certainly missing out, as I'm sure we'll all tell them when we get back. We've got a great afternoon this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the iPad. How many of you here have played with the iPad? I had my first experience last week. Isn't it wonderful? I'm completely sold on it. I hope that the tenor of the conversation this afternoon is going to definitely feel that this is not a passing fad, but something much more significant. Here we have, just to introduce the subject, Simon Domenko from ADA, who's going to tell us all about the iPad. Simon.
This brief presentation is entitled The iPad and the State of the American Media Economy, or as I've alternately titled it, I've seen the future and it is covered in greasy fingerprints, which all of you who have played with iPads know what I'm talking about. In fact, you know, in the first day that I played with the iPad, the first day that it was available, I thought, boy, you know, Apple should really own this, because it's such an integral part of the experience. Like, almost immediately becomes this kind of disgusting object, and then people say, oh, can I play with your iPad? And wipe it on your pants, and trying to subconsciously get over the fact that it's covered with your germs. I think that Apple would do wise to co-venture with perhaps KFC with its double down sandwich. Just own the fact that you're greasy and disgusting. I was thinking about this, but then Gizmodo, the gadget blog in New York, based in New York, actually did a video test of eating the sandwich, and playing with the iPad, and it completely disabled the iPad because it's just too disgustingly greasy. For those of you who are not familiar with the sandwich, it has 2 fried chicken fillets instead of bread, and the sandwich between it. There's all kinds of disgusting American food. Anyway, I wanted to point out something here. Take a look at the table on your iPad. Is here. It's here. It's here. It's here. They are side together. And then KFC actually has a thing called the kids' laptop meal. If you look at the logo in the upper right-hand corner, there's this mania with kind of mobile computing. So now everybody has to act like their thing is a mobile computer or a mobile device as well. And if you look at this, it's marketed very similar to the iPad. Choose your chicken, choose your size, choose your drink and snacks. It's like choosing apps on your iPhone or your iPad. It's ridiculous. I thought a lot about the iPad in putting together a presentation for AdAge, for our AdAge Insights group, which produces a series of white papers. Domenko said in media reports, basically the double down sandwich of media reports is incredibly long, complicated look at the American media, where it stood in 2009 and where it's going. Good thing is that we are seeing some recovery. As I began to work on this paper, the iPad had just been announced, and everybody in the New York media world in particular became obsessed with this idea that the iPad was going to suddenly change the world and save media. And so then we wanted a shift in the script from technology sort of taking a wrecking ball to everything in media, to suddenly now Steve Jobs is going to save us somehow. I'm not sure if it's going to work out that way, but as a prelude to the panel discussion we're going to have about the iPad, I wanted to bring up 5 brief points, thoughts about the iPad. By the way, the white papers are available just as advertising agents as a sponsor of this conference, so that's the extent of the infomercial that you get right there. Single most important thing to remember about iPad's launch is not this stuff, this Steve Jobs magical, blah, 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 revolutionary, blah, blah, blah. Somebody did a video mashup of all the times that the Apple people, including Steve Jobs, said magical on the day of launch. It was something like 200 times. Magical, 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 magical. That's all people can say. And of course it is magical when you first play around with it. But as a revolutionary media device, it remains to be seen. So beyond the rhetoric, I think the most important thing that was stated on that date was this. This is direct from Steve Jobs, the 125 million number. Steve said, We have over 125 million accounts with credit cards all enabled for one-click shopping on all these stores. The stores he was talking about, of course, were the app stores, iTunes, now there's an Apple store, etc. Steve Jobs is a very smart guy. He's obsessed with the idea of building this relationship with the consumer. Certainly there's Apple fanatics who feel very intimately connected to the Apple brand. But what's happening here is you're seeing Steve Jobs becoming this intermediary. And if you're a media person, you're used to the idea that you own that relationship with your customer. If you were newspaper publishing, not only did you know where your customer lived, but you literally probably paid a kid to throw your product on your customer's lawn. If you're a marketing person, you value media channels precisely because of that relationship. Now Steve Jobs is coming along and saying, oh, hold on, we actually have the first and foremost relationship with these consumers. In fact, 125 million of them have entrusted us with their credit card information. And if you want to get in contact with this consumer through our iApp ecosystem, come through me, Steve Jobs. This is a very key thing to consider about the iPhone, the iTouch ecosystem, and why the iPad was launched. Next point I want to bring up. This is a thought from Ben Rosen, a legendary technologist. He wrote this on his blog. Quote, I've now had my iPad for 10 days. It does everything as advertised. It's a barrel fun to play with. But it turns out that my main use for the iPad is demoing the iPad. He's still waiting for a killer app for the iPad. And actually, if you have an iPad, it's great to pull the thing out and show people, particularly the interactive encyclopedia. And it's like, oh, gee, what is this? It's fantastic. But we're still waiting for people to figure out quite what to do with it. And we're seeing, at least in the States, Timing putting out a $5 edition of Time magazine, and it looks great. But the idea that people are going to click to buy a $5 edition of the magazine on a weekly basis until subscription programs are rolled out, you can see that old media is still grappling with how to deal with this thing that they've had, theoretically, years of anticipation and since January to start to engineer. Next one I want to bring up, 3 out of 5 points. And by the way, these, if you're looking for links to some of these citations, you can send me an email at this address, estimenco@adage.com, and I'll send you links to the original posts. And they're worth reading in depth. Particular, Alan Rusbridger from the Guardian Group in London. His point is that iPad transforms your sense of scale. Now this is pretty obvious, obviously it's a bigger form factor. But I'm going to quote from his essay, which I think nails it. Quote, in the space of 4 days, my sense of scale has changed. On Tuesday, my new iPad seemed like a rather overblown iPhone. By Friday, I found myself irritated at trying to read emails or type on the iPhone, which already seems mean and cramped. A tabloid newspaper page seems exotically large, a broadsheet feels like street courting, the iPad just seems natural. Maybe Apple has simply rediscovered what book publishers, over the space of 400 years, came to a more or less settled view on, the right shape of page for what the human eye and hand feels easy with. I think that's key. And certainly when I look at my little iPhone now, it seems like this pathetic, mean, cramped little device once you consume media on an iPad. I also think very much the iPad is a 1.0 device. Think of it as sort of a blown-up iPhone or iTouch, but in fact, in this form factor, it's a significantly different media experience. And I think Apple's going to be playing around with different sizes that give it more portability. Certainly 1.5 pounds seems super light if you're not bringing a laptop, if you're bringing this instead. But it's still pretty heavy. I think that once we get below the 1 pound threshold, and maybe a smaller screen size that's a little bit more portable, then it potentially truly becomes a mass device rather than a geek kind of fantasy. Fourth point that I want to bring up, I think it's possible that the iPad might serve as the gateway to the post-scroll era. What I mean by this is that in the early days of the internet, when people still felt that they needed training wheels, when they needed to use a dial-up service in their online or CompuServe, you would get pages that were sort of like very simplified magazine table of contents. So you use buttons and little blurbs and little descriptions. And it would be all there, and you didn't have to scroll down 10 miles. miles to get to stuff as you do now in the post-blog era from 99, 2001. I'm going to show you real quickly. This is a beta version of Deadspin, which is a very popular sports blog based in a Gawker Media Group. Gets millions of unique visitors per month, the States. This is not live yet, I don't believe, but what's interesting, it's formatted for the iPad. So if you're on an iPad and you visit the Deadspin site, it takes you to this page as a default. And what's interesting is they're experimenting with moving away from this idea that you have to dive down to find stuff, and the whole sort of reverse chronology psychology that we've all gotten used to with the cumbersome blog sensibility. Everything's there, and you get back to this kind of old school mid-90s interactive design sensibility. It's almost like CD-ROMs or AOLs or 94, 95 oh, here's the most important thing. It's more curated. Here are some buttons to click on. You don't have to go down and down and down. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that even though we're all used to this kind of endless homepage sensibility, it's been a disservice to not only readers but marketers and content sites. I think we're going to see a lot more of this because of now we have this new page, this new playground to experiment with. Last point I want to bring up relates to a column that I published in Ad Age, which is titled Why the iPad has Inspired Me to Do It, My Toaster, My Coffee Maker, and My Pants. I won't go into complete detail. Obviously, I've changed my mind on the pants front, but basically I was parroting the idea that there's a lot of technologists who are frustrated with the idea that the iPad is a closed ecosystem and you have to sort of mostly go through the App Store to really take advantage of the power of the device. So I was suggesting that it's extremely limiting to have only 2 limb ports for your pants, and I wish somebody would start with the open source pants movement, but I think it'll be a while before we see that. But I bring up this piece because somebody left a comment on the column, which I thought was very insightful. This is a quote from that reader comment. Quote, "The iPad reminds me of the Fender Stratocaster and the Gibson Les Paul. There were 6-string electric guitars before, but the sleek hardwood body, thin neck, and close action feel good when playing, and strong magnetic pickups increase the range of the instrument, including harmonic effects, sustained notes, crystal clear tones, and electronic distortion. The negative whiners, by which he means the iPad bashers, are like the folkies who booed Bob Dylan when he went electric. If you can extend the range of a device, it makes it worth it to the people who will find a use for it." So we're still waiting for the people who will find a use for it. Steve Jobs is the Les Paul of tech. Who will be the Jimi Hendrix of tech? Very insightful insight from the reader. And a connected point here, which is Steve Jobs equals perhaps Bill Haley. This comes from a Wired magazine writer, Fred Fogelstein. What does this say about the new generation of touchscreen devices? Quote, "The iPhone, and probably the iPad, jury's out, are the first devices that truly solve the fundamental problem of media convergence. We are just as happy to do email and web surf as to lean back and watch a video or a movie with a handheld touchscreen device. Devices like the iPad and iPhone generate audience, which attract advertisers, a business which Apple is now in because of iAd, which attracts content. What's clear is that with each passing day, Steve Jobs is looking less and less like Sony's co-founder, Akio Morita, and more like CBS's Bill Haley, the man credited with inventing network television." Actually, in my white paper, I make the point, I sort of went beyond the Bill Haley metaphor, and suggested that what we're really looking at with Apple now is something sort of unparalleled in the history of technology and media, which is that we're used to the idea of like General Electric having made some media devices, the television version, and then owning NBC Universal. But General Electric didn't want to grow up to be an advertising company. It didn't try to become Omnicom. And now with the iAd ecosystem, you have Steve Jobs saying that he wants to build the devices. He wants to control how the devices are built. Because there's this whole kind of flash war and app authoring controversy going on with Apple. He wants to control the flow. He wants to control the 125 million credit cards that allow that media to get to the consumer. And then he wants to cut out the advertising revenue as well. So I think it's really interesting to contemplate Apple becoming kind of the new gorilla of not only consumer technology, but media and advertising. In fact, I think it's sort of the trickle-down sandwich of media and technology right now and advertising. You know, it's they're trying to pack a lot into the Apple bottom line. Basically, that's it. We're going to have a little group discussion up here. I just wanted to say once again that if you'd like more links, send an email to esconeko@adage.com, and I'll leave you with this final couple of thoughts from KFC and Apple. Unthink and think different. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction to the iPad. Thank you. And thank you also for the reassurance of not giving up your pants. I think you will be delighted to hear that.
Maybe at the party later, but...
And our panel coming to join us now. So, Russell Buckley from Admiral, Matthew Hunt from Adonia. And while we get seated, we've got some questions for you. Do you think the iPad is bad or is it fantastic? Answer now, please. Well, 64% fantastic. As for you, 36%, I wonder what you think is coming next. We've got another question for you. What do you think, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much of an opportunity does the iPad provide for your company as a marketing or sales platform? If you could vote now. So the highest score is 31%. On number 4, so that's a pretty good platform. 11% really optimistic. 14% pretty gloomy. That's a good starting point for our conversation. Russell, are they likely to write it about this way, do you think?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is the personal response, which actually reflects the question, which is that it's just the jury's still out. It's still early days. iPad's only sold about 500,000 models. But then in perspective, the iPhone itself has sold about 90 million, and there are 4 billion mobile phones in the world. So it's actually a tiny, tiny bit of a tiny bit.
How do you think it is?
Well, we tend to, as a company, look at the numbers. So we start getting interested in an iPhone when we can see that people were using it in a certain way, which is to use the mobile phone for the first time on a mobile device. And also starting to use apps, so we start getting huge volumes of paging process, which allows us to send more apps. So we would tend to sit back and see what the numbers are like. At the moment, it's too small. To give you an example, we've served 15 billion ads in the last month, of which 10 million were on iPad. So we're seeing. But the interesting thing is that sector, that mobile device sector, which isn't designed for phone calls. By that I mean that called Touch, as an example. The PlayStation, the Wii, we're serving as a nose and they currently take up about 20% of the network. So the category as a whole is actually very interesting. There's a lot of going on there. The iPad's the latest. Frankly, I think we're not going to see whether it's going to be a real game changer for at least another year till the initial glitches are removed, and until obviously it goes sold on a wider geographical basis.
Of course, right. There'll be a lot of buyers who are sitting back and waiting to see the little ironed out this time, I guess, before they buy. Do you think it's bad or a fantasy?
I think it's interesting when you consider the format and what's happening. I think that content producers, it's interesting, and with that I mean also brands and what brands are doing in the content space as well. I think content producers, publishers in particular, are very interested to understand what the iPad offers them. I think that people are trying to figure out what is the opportunity relating to it in relation to something that is very difficult to categorise. It's somewhere between the iPhone, somewhere between the notebook. I think it represents huge we're a company at Anconia where we're moving very much into the development of content, distribution of that content across lots of platforms. So from our perspective, I think that while we remain optimistic about the advertising plan, I think what's interesting about it is actually the ability to develop content and distribute that not only across the web but also onto iPhones, onto a larger format, particularly around video in very portable ways, is very appealing for brands. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for brands to reach customers in a way that they haven't been able to before.
And those video ads are incredibly effective on the iPad, aren't they? And I think they will be attractive. Do you think it's
Yeah, I think the video thing is extremely advantageous for marketers and for media companies that can perform well in that area. What's I think very scary for print publishers, which they didn't really realize when they started creating these sort of ported versions of the publications, newspapers and magazines, is that if you're a 15-year-old kid or a 25-year-old with your iPad, you suddenly have this level playing field where it's like, oh, wow, this awesome game that I paid $5 for versus Netflix, the movie rental service, something like that out in the States, and Hulu is rumored to be coming out with a video app. There's all this great other content, and then you look at newspapers. Some magazines are doing this. Some have had video production capabilities for years now, and they've been doing this on their websites. But nobody's particularly good at it. I particularly cringe when I look at newspaper websites and I see sort of the dorky reporters who are probably best behind the keyboard suddenly having to do 2 minutes of video, and it gets very cringeworthy. And you stack that kind of media experience up versus the awesome video game with touch sensitive and accelerometer kind of stuff. It's like, how many people in the target demo are going to be paying $5 for that traditional media experience, even if it's sexed up with a little video?
Traditional newspapers know that their readers do like to use video, and they just got to be a lot better at doing it.
Much better.
Russell, they got a long way to go. Do you think they should just not bother actually buying?
Well, I think one of the interesting things which we're seeing in terms of video is the overwhelming uptake of video by the advertising community at the moment, particularly for iPhone, where you can create a very seamless experience, and I'll show where the industry is at tomorrow in my presentation about how we got from where we are today to where we are now. And you'll see that in the last 10 years, the industry's changed completely from basically text messaging through to full-blown integrated video, where it can reformat, repurpose itself. And you can get a very great experience. The difference really between the iPad and the iPhone in that respect is one you're holding in the lap and one you're holding in your hand. And in terms of the digital impact, you get that different experience. So I think for perhaps the foreseeable future, like the next year or so, people will go to using video most on the iPad as an extension of the iPhone, and other mobile devices can be advertising community rather than the media publishers themselves.
Neat plug for Russell's session tomorrow. I hope you're paying attention. Meanwhile, any questions for the panel on the iPad? All satisfied users out there?
I think while we're waiting for the question, I think one of the points you made earlier is one of the fundamental differences in Apple's business and the advertising business is they've been able to do something which a lot of media companies have not been able to do, which is create a resistant billing relationship between technology provider and device or the publisher, whatever it may be. So I think when we start talking about how the opportunity this presents to publishers, all of a sudden you're in a space that's already proven that people will pay for content, whether it be a movie, whether it be premium content, whatever it may be. So I think while the jury's out as to what the pricing model will be, and there's going to be a huge inertia around the paid-for content model, I think it is a very interesting situation where you have consumers conditioned that actually, you know what, and I'll put my hands up before I would just rip off music to my friends and something like that. Now I just don't have the time, if I want to know, I'm just going to buy it on iTunes. So I think that's going to be very interesting when it comes to movies, sitting in the airport stranded. You know what, I'm just going to go and buy a box set of Entourage or whatever it may be as well. So I think there's this shift in how people are using technology, and I think that the iPad with a larger format, because I'm not going to look at that on my iPhone, but I probably would on my laptop, but I don't really my laptop, so that form factor interesting, and it's going to actually, going to be the device where I'll pay for content probably for the first time in London.
Yeah, it's also worth noting though that obviously some people are buying content by the iPhone. The vast majority of iTunes downloads are apps, and they're free apps. So while it's managed to train a certain small portion of the population to pay for stuff, the vast majority of people still expect it for free. And so, I think the balance is still out.
That's awesome. Some different point of views. No, that's great. And then you get to pay. Then you get to an advertising funded model, which really relies on scale, targeting, optimization of the content, and then the advertising model as well. And I think that's where the iPad falls down, and why it really represents just one arm of a broader content, advertising, distribution strategy. And that's where technology companies are really, I think, well placed if they can distribute the content and the advertising to an audience irrespective of what the device may be.
There's been some debate about the actual weight of this device. How mobile do you think it's going to be?
I think it's pretty heavy at 1.5 pounds. I mean, it's a little too unwieldy to be a mass device at this point. And within probably 24 hours of its release, there was already talk that Apple was already developing a 7-inch screen version. I think we haven't quite figured out the exact point yet. I think this makes sense for books. Apple sort of is using this, I think, to further capture whatever mobile becomes. And it's fascinating to look at mobile advertising numbers and projections, because you look at these fantastic numbers from eMarketer and Forrester Research, and there's all these columns that say mobile is going to explode. But what does it mean? I mean, I brought this instead of my laptop to Valencia. So everything that I'm doing here is mobile, even though I'm browsing traditional web pages on the browser. So the categories are going to completely blur. And then at the same time, as the consumer's experience is simplified, it's complicated for marketers, because it's as if you suddenly wanted to advertise in television, and you had to go to GE, and GE had dominated the television market by making GE televisions. And they said, oh, well, sure, you've worked with your marketing company and your creative types, and you have this integrated campaign. But to get on to our television sets, and we control, by the way, the television set market. We're GE, we're fantastic, everybody loves us. To get on this, you have to give us a cut of the advertising. And I think the number that Apple's talking about with the iPad, it's a healthy number for Apple, 40%. So it's quite a number.
Which brand has used the iPad brilliantly so far? And I'll answer that first, if I may. Those of you who haven't seen it yet, have a look at the Wall Street Journal app. Very good and safe.
I think Apple. That's the example that jumps out to me. I think that the hybrids around it, I think that they've done an amazing job. I think we've leveraged that as well. An event in the US to gain media for people. I think that people are caught up in the hype of what it is, and I think that some of the examples remain to be seen.
Well, I would sort of agree with both of you in as much as I think the people who have used it to best effect so far actually haven't been the brands, traditional advertising brands, whether it be the media owners, Wall Street Journal, Time, etc., and also the games platforms have really embraced it and really made this their own. And they're not traditional brands, but they're the people who are using it at the moment. I think most of the advertising community is waiting and seeing how effective it's going to be.
You said to start with so few out there, really. Simon, any thoughts on the brands?
Among media brands, I think most have stumbled so far. ABC, the American Television Network, has a fantastic app that everybody that I know who has used it is very delighted with it. So it serves a very beautiful menu of all the viewing options and serves a video flawlessly. And you sort of understand holding it, watching a 30-minute sitcom, that this device has the potential to be transformative. And I think, other media companies, New York Times hasn't done so well with its kind of media time, New York Times Light. Wall Street Journal has done well. USA Today, largest, second largest now behind the Wall Street Journal, American newspaper, has done pretty well with it. But for the most part, there's a big learning curve that still needs to be.
And of course, now it's not going on sale in Europe until the end of May. And by the way, do we believe the reason why it's not going on sale until the end of May? It's just too popular to say it's returned.
moment when Apple stops being quite so hostile to Microsoft? Might we see Microsoft software, perhaps, coming into it?
This is a hard question to answer. I mean, I think if you look at Microsoft and Apple historically, they've sort of been something called frenemies in as much as they cooperate with some areas. So on my Apple Mac Pro, I can certainly use Microsoft software pretty seamlessly these days. So to argue that they're going to try and restrict Microsoft is something we'll have to see. I mean, it's often not much that it often seems to be not necessarily business decisions which behind these things, with other things which we don't actually see which drive those decisions.
Customer driven, perhaps?
Yeah, customer driven, you know.
I think what's really interesting with Apple is that because of its war on Adobe with non-support of Flash, because of its recent edict that it would only support native developed apps from now on, which is another dig at Adobe, which angered a lot of people in the development community and angered a lot of people in the print world to use Adobe applications, produce the publications. We're hoping to very easily port over what they've been doing already to this new environment. And Apple said, no, you have to use our Pro tools and our Pro tools only, and you have to do that from step one. Apple is angering a lot of people in the app world, and they're sort of throwing their weight around and saying, we get to do this because we're Apple. And they can sort of do it because the iPhone base is a huge base, and even though, as you pointed out, it's comparatively small in the overall cell phone market, it has transformed the smartphone market as it's the thought leader in the advertising, the smartphone advertising market. So it remains to be seen if, it's been fantastic, and Apple, buying a mobile ad company, it's been fantastic for Google, with its AdMob acquisition, because the FCC considered as thought, maybe this is anti-competitive, has been dragging its heels. Now Apple shows up and says, not only are we buying one, but we get 40%.
The questions are continuing to come through on this subject. We could go on for a lot longer. It's a great debate, I think. However, we have to stop there. Any of these questions that we haven't dealt with so far will be dealt with later, and you'll see the answers outside. Can I thank all the members of the panel on your behalf for their brief but scintillating performance out here. You'll hear more tomorrow. We've got another session to move on to now. Thank you very much.